Long before marble sparkled under the Roman sun, before columns rose over the Latium fields, and crowds gathered under the steaming domes of the great baths, there were only moist earth and hidden springs among the woods. The Roman relationship with water did not begin with engineering, but with reverence. In a Rome still wrapped in myths and tribal traditions, water was seen as a divine gift, a blessing from the gods that emerged from the earth with mystery and power. Natural springs, lakes, and streams were not just sources of sustenance. They were living temples, portals between the world of men and the invisible realm, made manifest through the constant murmur of flowing waters. The first communities of Latium, still under Etruscan and Sabine influence, performed purification rituals at springs and damp caves where drops filtered through rocks like the tears of the gods. The goddess Egeria, the mystical consort of Hermetis Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, was revered as a water nymph, a spiritual counselor who dictated laws and rites through the fluid silence of the fountains. Numa would visit her sacred groves, bathe in the cool waters, and listen to the voices of the divine. In this archaic phase, water cleansed not just the body, it purified the soul, sealed pacts, healed the sick, prepared the dead, and initiated the living into sacred paths. Water worship was constant. Festivals like La Fontinalia were dedicated to springs and water deities. During these rites, Romans adorned fountains with flower garlands, offered gifts, and held processions. The god Fontus, son of Janus, represented living springs and was honored as a source of renewal and fertility. Alongside him, other deities formed a watery pantheon: Juturna, protector of healing waters; Volturnus, lord of rivers; and Tiberinus, spirit of the Tiber, guardian of the secrets of the river that cut through Rome like the spine of history. In this early stage, bathing occurred in rivers or small stone structures near homes, always preceded by prayers and sacred gestures. It was believed that impure spirits could contaminate the waters, so permission from the gods was needed before submersion. The Yogas, interpreters of divine signs, saw water as a silent oracle. And so, even before Rome had its walls, among its earliest people, there already flowed an invisible devotion that shaped daily life and sculpted a collective mindset: the veneration of water as something sacred, untamed, and essential. As Rome grew, that respect for nature was transformed into technical mastery. But the ancient reverence was never forgotten. It was simply channeled, literally, by the engineers of the Republic and Empire. Waters once honored at riversides were now carried through hidden conduits beneath the city, reaching homes and baths as silent witnesses of an ancestral pact. Water was now controlled, but not desecrated. Its memory lived on in the names of fountains, the stories of gods, and the sense of purity every Roman sought upon entering a bathhouse. Thus, the origins of the Roman baths lie not only in engineering or architecture, they reside in the collective spirit that over centuries came to see water not as mere utility, but as a bridge to the eternal. The grand public baths would later emerge as monumental continuations of something much older: the human need to reconnect with the source, the primal spring, the gods of silence, the eternal flow of life. When Rome decided to conquer nature, it did not do so with violence, but with ingenuity. Water, that ancient symbol of purity and mystery, came to be directed, elevated, channeled, and conducted through works that defied time, gravity, and terrain. The revolution that turned Rome into a metropolis, capable of feeding its fountains, supplying its districts, and filling its baths, began almost silently, but became one of the greatest demonstrations of Roman power over matter and space. The story of the aqueducts is the story of reason triumphing over chaos, technique over chance, planning over improvisation, an invisible victory that still pulses in the bones of the city. The first Roman aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was built in 312 years before Christ, at the height of the Republic, by Appius Claudius Caecus, the same man responsible for the Appian Way. Spanning about 16 kilometers, this structure marked the beginning of a new urban era. From that point onward, Rome would no longer rely solely on local springs. It would import water from higher, distant regions. In just 4 centuries, 11 major aqueducts would cross hills, valleys, and mountains to supply a city that, at its peak, housed over 1 million inhabitants. The names of these structures, Aqua Marcia, Aqua Claudia, Aqua Virgo, Aqua Traiana, resound like hymns of classical engineering. Roman aqueducts were not just channels for water, they were symbols of political power and technical dominance. Roman engineers, masters of calculating slope and gravity, created structures that carried water across dozens of kilometers with minimal incline, often no more than 34 centimeters per kilometer. To achieve this, they carved tunnels, built bridges, diverted rivers, and confronted the landscape with audacity and precision. The Aqua Marcia, for example, brought pure water from the Anian Mountains across nearly 91 kilometers, a monumental distance for antiquity, with both underground and elevated sections that continue to astonish archaeologists and architects today. These systems were managed by the Curatores Aquarum, administrators responsible for maintenance, distribution, and oversight. One of the most famous was Sextus Julius Frontinus, author of the invaluable treatise De Aquis Urbis Romae, which outlines the hydraulic workings of the capital in meticulous detail. To Frontinus, water was a public good, a citizen's right, and a hallmark of civilization. He distinguished between water for fountains, private homes, gardens, factories, and of course, the massive public baths, which required a continuous and immense supply. The Roman baths, cities within the city, only existed because Rome had learned to master its waters. Some bath complexes consumed millions of liters per day, delivered by aqueducts that ran for kilometers without pumps, only using gradients and carefully calculated slopes. Water reached cisterns, was distributed to hot and cold pools, circulated through hypocaust systems, and was finally discarded through advanced sewage networks. All of this without electricity, reinforced concrete or industrial machinery, only with the precision of Roman calculations, topographical knowledge, and patient labor. This quiet revolution made possible one of Rome's most iconic institutions, the public bath. Unlike the Greeks, who saw bathing as an elite ritual of beauty, the Romans turned it into a daily democratic experience. And this was only possible because the aqueducts brought the distant spring into the heart of the city. Where there was thirst, there was now abundance. Where there was dust, now marble. Where there was solitude, now encounter. More than feats of engineering, the aqueducts were bridges between worlds, between nature and the city, between the silence of mountains and the murmurs of the baths. They are the flowing link that joins sacred past to monumental present, a liquid current that not only moved Rome, but kept it alive, clean, dazzling, and socially vibrant. Rome was, above all, an empire of engineers, and its waters still run, even through ruins, echoing a greatness that never dried up. Before the marble of the Baths of Caracalla gleamed beneath the imperial sky, before the colonnades stretched across hectares, and the baths became synonymous with mass leisure, Rome learned to bathe in far more modest settings, spaces infused with the routines of the Republican era. The first public baths were not aquatic palaces, but small functional communal structures known as balnea. Discreet, practical, and intimately woven into the urban fabric, they represented the first steps of a revolutionary idea, that the body of every citizen, no matter how humble, deserved warm water, steam, and purification. This marked the beginning of a cultural transformation that would elevate bathing from a private act to a collective ritual, from elite privilege to plebeian right. During the centuries of the Roman Republic, from 509 before Christ to 27 before Christ, the city grew rapidly, fueled by territorial conquests, commerce, and migration. With the influx of diverse peoples, daily life became more intense, and the need for common spaces more urgent. In this context, public balneacor emerged as practical urban solutions, often financed by wealthy citizens seeking political prestige and popularity. These bathhouses reflected the Roman tradition of patronage and civic virtue. Building a bathhouse was an effective way to demonstrate one's geisant virtus ex generosity and commitment to the common good. Though smaller than the later imperial bath complexes, these structures already followed a functional layout. Visitors entered the pea poditerium, changing room, moved to the tepidarium to acclimate, then immersed themselves in the hot waters of the caldarium, and finally rejuvenated in the cold plunge of the full frigidarium. Many balnea also featured a court laconicum, a dry sauna inspired by Greek models. Even in these early days, the Roman ingenuity shone through with the use of the hypocaust, a system of underground heating where hot air circulated beneath raised floors and inside walls. The construction of balnea reshaped neighborhoods. They became social hubs, where citizens of all backgrounds, patricians, plebeians, freedmen, even foreigners, interacted. Entry was affordable, often free thanks to public subsidies. Still, subtle distinctions remained. Certain hours were reserved for women while others were dominated by men. Some elite bathhouses limited access for slaves and the poor. Yet the ideal of shared civility was born. Rome began to sculpt not just roads and forums, but a deculture of bodily presence and public interaction. As the habit of bathing spread, private balnea proliferated among the wealthy. These home baths, smaller and more luxurious, became part of patrician domiciliary countryside of Ville. Adorned with mosaics, marbles, and frescoes, they offered an intimate, refined experience. However, even the rich frequented public baths. Being seen, mingling, and engaging with the citizenry had symbolic value. As Pliny the Younger wrote, "The bath is one of the few places where a Roman sets aside the toga and becomes equal to others." Toward the end of the Republic and the dawn of the Empire, the baths gained increasing political significance. Governors and magistrates understood that investing in public works was an effective means of gaining popular support. Thus, balnea became tools of propaganda, and the act of bathing came to symbolize civic virtue, cleanliness, discipline, respect for the body and time. Bathing was no longer just hygiene. It was a moral, social, and political ritual. It was in these spaces that the Senate was discussed. Legal issues debated, gossip spread, and influence measured. With the rise of emperors like Augustus and Nero, the concept of the monumental baths began to take shape. These vast imperial complexes would eventually eclipse the humble republican balnea, but they were built upon the foundations of those early structures, the modest bathhouses, where the first Roman discovered that water was more than relief. It was civilization. To cross the grand portico of a Roman bathhouse was to enter more than a public building. It was to step into a sensory sanctuary, where the body, the mind, and one's social standing were shaped, displayed, and cleansed. The journey through the baths was never random. It was ritually designed, a passage through temperature, touch, light, and breath. Roman baths were not simply architectural complexes, they were machines of collective experience, planned to guide thousands of people through a sacred sequence where every stone, pool, and drop of water served both a practical and symbolic purpose. Everything began in the apoditerium, the changing room. There, citizens undressed, not only their garments, but their social ranks as well. Each person handed over their clothes to either personal slaves or public attendants known as capsari. Though subtle social distinctions still lingered, this space encouraged a form of visual equality. Naked bodies, tanned, muscular, aged, or frail, sharing the same marble bench. The apoditerium was functional in layout, with niches, benches, and frescoes often depicting mythological scenes of bathing, nymphs, and aquatic gods. From there, one moved to the hot tepidarium, the warm room, a space of transition. Its mild temperature and soft humidity prepared the body. Breathing deepened, pores opened, tension melted. Light filtered gently through high windows, and the echo of dripping water set a tranquil rhythm. Many Romans lingered here, seated on warm benches, receiving oil massages or having their skin scraped with strigils, curved bronze or silver tools used to remove sweat, dirt, and oils. Next came the heart of the experience, the caldarium damma, the hot room. Heated by the hypocaustium system, an ingenious network of hot air circulating under raised floors and inside walls, it offered thick steam, intense heat, and a deeply immersive environment. The caldarium featured a large hot water pool, often surrounded by niches and columns. In imperial baths like Caracalla's or Diocletian's, golden mosaics and vaulted ceilings created a divine atmosphere. Bathing here was like entering the belly of a temple. Following this came the Hygiene frigidarium, the cold plunge, a sudden shock to the senses, crisp marble, icy water, sharp air. The frigidarium revived the body after heat-induced lethargy. Architecturally, these rooms were often grand and luminous, with vast pools, marble statues, and skylights streaming in natural light. Some bath complexes ended the journey here, with this pagan baptism of sorts, serving as symbolic rebirth. Adjacent to the bathing cycle was the palaestra, the athletic courtyard. Here, visitors exercised before their baths, stretching, wrestling, lifting weights. Physical culture, inherited partly from the Greeks, took on a Roman shape, less philosophical, more civic. A healthy citizen was a strong one, a soldier, a provider, a leader, and this was sculpted just as much in the baths as in the battlefield. Bathhouses also offered libraries, reading rooms, gardens, eateries, and lounges. These were cultural centers, not just places to bathe. One could spend the entire day in a bath complex. The service was accessible, often free, and access to water, once divine, was now an urban rite. The bathhouse was where Rome saw itself, felt itself, and celebrated itself. The architecture of the baths mirrored the Roman soul, immense, ordered, harmonious, and profoundly political. Nothing was left to chance. Every sound, temperature, and visual angle was calculated for pleasure, health, interaction, and imperial propaganda. The citizen's body entered a spatial choreography, where bathing, strengthening, and belonging all converged. If Rome was the heart of the empire, its baths were the daily heartbeat, warming, cleansing, uniting, and shaping the population. An empire that mastered water knew how to turn it into culture. The baths were lay temples, where the body was honored, sweat became ritual, and community was celebration. To step into a Roman bathhouse was to cross a threshold between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Beneath stone vaults, between towering columns and mosaics depicting immortal myths, time itself seemed to dissolve. The baths were far more than places of hygiene. They were unfully designed sensory environments, meticulously crafted to stimulate, soothe, and seduce the human body and soul. The Roman bathing experience was a choreography of sensations: heat and cold, light and shadow, silence and murmur, touch and steam. And within these walls, the body ceased to be merely functional. It became an object of celebration, of refinement, of belonging to civilization. Upon entering the complex, visitors were immediately enveloped by delicate and penetrating aromas, diffused through burning herbs, perfumed oils, and scented steam. Spikenard oil, imported from India, was among the most prized. Frankincense carcass brought echoes of the East. Lavender, rosemary, and myrtle were used in unguents and infusions for calming and purifying. In the hands of skilled slaves known as unctus, these oils were massaged into the skin with slow circular motions that transformed the body into a landscape of pleasure and ritual. The combination of heat, touch, and fragrance created a state of physical and emotional trance, a quiet rebirth. The sounds of the baths composed a unique acoustic landscape. At times, one heard only the hiss of steam, the echo of bare feet on wet marble, or the gentle splash of ladles pouring water. At others, the space buzzed with political debates, laughter in the warm pools, and the rhythmic commands of trainers in the palastra. The acoustics, engineered into the walls and ceilings, either amplified or softened the sound. Some rooms were intentionally quiet, others encouraged interaction. Visitors moved through auditory states, like travelers through the movements of a symphony. Touch was perhaps the most intimately engaged sense. The warmth of the caldarium seeped into every pore. The heated floor cradled the feet. The hands of the masseurs pressed into tired muscles, stretched limbs, and released tension. The strigils, those curved metal tools, scraped sweat and dirt from the skin in ceremonial sweeps. Then buckets of water were poured over the body, shocking it into new awareness. Finally, the cold plunge of the frigidarium offered a stunning contrast. An icy wave that revitalized, awakened, and sharpened the senses. The entire cycle was designed to balance the body's humors and renew its vital force. Visually, the baths were breathtaking. Walls adorned with colored marble, Corinthian columns, bronze and marble statues, fountains, and vaulted ceilings painted with mythological frescoes made the environment as much a gallery as a bathhouse. This was no empty display. It was a form of education. As citizens gazed upon Hercules in battle or Venus bathing, they absorbed ideals of strength, beauty, and harmony. The art elevated the spirit, refined the gaze, and reinforced the values of the Roman world. The baths were a living museum, a temple of memory, a theatre of the body. Even the sense of taste was not forgotten. Larger bathhouses included areas for light meals, dried fruits, bread, diluted wine, herbal infusions, and small warm dishes. Prolonged bathing required energy, and many visitors stayed the whole day. Eating in the baths was part of the experience, the socializing, the rhythm of indulgence. The flavors were simple but nourishing, and they completed the sense of being fully embraced by the space. To the Roman mind, bathing was a civilized act. One did not simply wash off the dust of the streets. One renewed one's identity as a citizen. Bathing reaffirmed belonging to the urban order, to the community, to the empire. It was seen as a moral and physical necessity. A dirty body was a disorderly body, and therefore a social risk. The baths did not merely purify the skin, they cleansed the civic soul, restored trust and rebuilt public bonds. After leaving the bath, a person was not the same. The body had been touched, warmed, perfumed, and strengthened. The mind had conversed, laughed, and listened. The spirit had walked through an ancient rite disguised as leisure. And this silent transformation was the true legacy of the Roman baths. Even today, the ruins of the baths hush the visitor, not only for their grandeur, but for the kind invisible echo of the sensory world that once filled them, like vapor that never truly vanished, like memory that whispers through the cracked marble. Rome knew how to touch the body, but it also knew how to touch the soul. Within the great Roman baths, between the steam of the caldarium and the whispers of the frigidarium, not only bodies were bathed, but also words, pacts, and glances. The baths were far more than places of cleanliness or rest. They were epicenters of urban social life, public spaces where the dramas and alliances of Roman civilization played out. Here, the elite and the commoner mingled. Anonymity and reputation coexisted, and chance encounters often shaped the paths of commerce, politics, and even conspiracies. To enter a Roman bath was to immerse oneself not only in water, but in the living society of the empire. It was common to find senators, equestrians, and magistrates moving freely through the halls of the baths, without their togas, dressed only in light tunics or completely nude like the rest. This physical despoiling created a rare atmosphere of apparent equality, where a well-spoken freedman could share a marble bench with a bored senator. Social classes brushed against each other, in sight and space, in an environment where the naked body became the great equalizer. And it was within this context that deals were struck, proposals whispered, and rivalries veiled behind casual conversation. In the Parapoditerium, the changing room, one could hear rumors of Senate decisions, military campaigns, scandalous affairs, and bets on the next games at the Colosseum. In the Tas Tepidarium, groups gathered for philosophical discussions, public readings, or light banter. The very layout of the baths encouraged dialogue. Semicircular benches, shallow pools meant for long stays, and side rooms for more discreet exchanges. Some brought slaves to take notes or deliver messages. The baths became a county forum without togas, a marketplace of influence soaked in steam. Philosopher Seneca, ever the moral observer, criticized the noise and superficiality of the bathhouses, describing them as filled with the shouting of men, the sound of slaps, the splashing of water, and indecent singing. Indeed, not all encounters were noble. The baths were also home to disputes, provocations, and even fights. A poorly timed comment, a glance taken the wrong way, could spark confrontation. Young men competed for attention, gladiators displayed their physiques, and politicians tested their speeches in front of a half-naked audience. It was an open theatre, where masks were replaced by gestures, and the stage was made of stone and water. Women, meanwhile, had designated times or their own sections in certain bathhouses. Though more restricted in the early centuries, large cities had separate or annexed spaces for female bathing. There, women built their own social environments, sharing recipes, negotiating marriages, exchanging gossip, practicing beauty rituals, or teaching one another to read. The female baths were spheres of cultural and symbolic power. where matrons and young girls shaped their public image, vital in a society that prized reputation and elegance. Beyond casual meetings, the baths also hosted scheduled events, poetry readings, musical performances, athletic exhibitions, and even informal legal sessions. Philosophers, doctors, and rhetoricians used the opportunity to share ideas and advertise their services. Galen, the famous physician, observed bodies in the baths to study skin conditions and social behavior, later converting his observations into medical and philosophical writings. The environment pulsed like a microcosm of Rome itself, bustling, diverse, intense. Still, under the apparent openness lay subtle codes of etiquette and exclusion. In the most luxurious baths, some areas were reserved for the elite. In imperial bathhouses like those of Nero or Domitian, private rooms were available for select guests, where sensitive political matters could be discussed in privacy. Public bathing, though seemingly democratic, followed an invisible protocol. Where one sat, whom one spoke to, what oil one used, everything signaled one's social rank and influence. Even so, the baths remained for centuries one of the few places where social boundaries were, if briefly, softened. They embodied the urban soul of Rome. Coexistence, diversity, tension, and communion. People laughed, the powerful negotiated, the wise observed, and the empire pulsed through each misty corridor. In those warm waters, Rome spoke to itself, body to body, voice to voice, sweat to sweat. And perhaps more than in forums, palaces, or temples, it is there that one can feel the essence of the city, a civilization built not only by law and sword, but by daily encounters, close faces and whispered words drifting through the steam. If the Roman people found in the baths a refuge from heat, dust, and urban fatigue, the emperors saw them as strategic stages for the performance of power. The monumental bath complexes were not merely utilitarian buildings, they were architectural declarations of imperial prestige, public demonstrations of generosity, control, and grandeur. Like temples without gods, these structures welcomed thousands of bodies each day, and with them, the perceptions, affections, and political loyalty of the Roman people. As one walked across a marble pool or rested beneath a vaulted ceiling adorned with mosaics, one remembered, consciously or not, who had given this gift: the emperor. The project of the imperial baths took shape with greater clarity during the reign of the Agrippa, general and son-in-law of Augustus, who in 25 before Christ built one of Rome's first large public baths. Though its structure did not survive, its legacy was profound. It set a new scale of luxury, symmetry, and urban planning. From then on, each emperor sought to surpass the previous one, not just in wars and monuments, but in the splendor of public bathing. The names of these baths speak volumes: Baths of Nero, Baths of Trajan, Baths of Caracalla, Baths of Diocletian. Each imperial, each monumental, each political. Each of these complexes was a city within a city, with areas spanning thousands of square meters, including gymnasiums, libraries, gardens, dining halls, art galleries, and auditoriums. The colossal architecture, featuring Egyptian granite columns, soaring vaults, and godlike sculptures, conveyed a clear message: the empire was eternal, powerful, and civilized. And the emperor, by offering this space to the people, portrayed himself as a mediator between divine luxury and public well-being. It was generosity used as a tool of loyalty. The propaganda was subtle but ever-present. Many bathhouses featured dedications carved in stone, praising the emperor who commissioned the work. Sculptures depicted mythological figures, but also idealized versions of the emperor as Apollo, Hercules, or Mars, fusing his image with the heroic and divine. Mosaics illustrated imperial victories, public gifts, or scenes of abundance and order. The bath was free, but its symbolic cost was paid in admiration, memory, and silent political gratitude. The Baths of Caracalla, inaugurated in 216 after Christ, are perhaps the most magnificent example. Built to serve up to 8,000 people per day, they included priceless artworks, lush gardens, Olympic-sized pools, and a hydraulic system so advanced it continues to inspire modern engineers. Visitors moved through marble halls, past sculptures, under decorated ceilings, through spaces that radiated abundance and order. It felt like bathing inside the empire itself, and that feeling was no accident. There was Baths of Diocletian, inaugurated in 306 after Christ, were even larger. Built during a time of crisis, they served as a message of imperial restoration and control. By allowing people of all backgrounds to experience beauty and luxury, Diocletian presented himself as a restorer of harmony, a provider of comfort in an age of fear. The architectural majesty calmed anxieties. The warmth and water provided relief, but also the illusion of stability. More than that, the baths served as ideological tools of cohesion. They enacted a daily performance of peace, order, and prosperity, even when reality was otherwise. While famine, war, or political strife brewed outside, the baths offered an experience of unity and power. That's why emperors kept building them, even during financial hardship. The baths were worth more than gold. They were hard factories of consensus. This strategy extended beyond Rome. Across the provinces of the empire, governors and local elites built bathhouses modeled after imperial examples, linking distant cities symbolically to the capital. From Carthage to Antioch, from Ephesus to Londinium, the Roman baths became symbols of Roman presence, embassies of comfort and civilization, liquid monuments to the Pax Romana. Thus, the baths were more than water and stone. They were built with strategy, ideology, and architectural affection. Each pillar was a political statement, each pool a stage for memory, in every drop a reminder that Rome cared for its people and that the emperor was watching, reigning, and providing, even in the steam. Behind the polished columns, the mosaics that shimmered in the light of dusk, and the steam that hovered like sacred mist in the bath halls, there was more to the Roman thermae than just pleasure and rest. Beneath the appearance of sensory freedom lay a sophisticated structure of moral and political control, which made the baths not only places of sociability, but also of e-surveillance and collective indoctrination. It was there, in the humid and perfumed enclosures where bodies surrendered to heat and nakedness, that the empire exercised one of its most subtle forms of power, the power to shape habits, standardize behaviors, and observe the soul through the skin. The constant presence of imperial officials, public slaves and administrators, made the baths regulated environments. There were schedules, expected conduct, and unwritten rules about coexistence and etiquette. Although open to all classes, the baths operated as a grand stage of public morality, where every gesture, every word, and every appearance could be observed, commented on, or judged. Writers like Juvenal, in his satires, mocked the superficiality and corruption flourishing in public baths, portraying bathers as vain, hypocritical, and given to lust and gossip. Others, like Seneca, saw in the baths signs of the decline of traditional values, warning against hedonism and the insatiable pursuit of comfort. Bathing, once a sacred ritual of purification, had also become a spectacle of the body, a daily parade of beauty, strength, and youth. Social pressure to display oneself in good shape, with clean skin, defined muscles, and elegant demeanor, was part of a silent system of distinction. The more astute bathers knew that how they behaved at the baths could influence their reputation beyond the bathhouse. A disrespectful gesture, an inappropriate comment, or an excessive advance, any of these could echo through the streets and forums. The freedom offered by the thermae was at the same time a trap. One could be watched more closely there than anywhere else. Moreover, the emperors themselves understood the strategic value of these spaces as tools of social appeasement. By offering leisure, warmth, beauty, and free sociability during times of scarcity or political tension, they neutralized part of the public's discontent. A people that was clean, relaxed, and entertained had less time and energy for revolt. It was a formula tested and refined over centuries: bread, games, and baths. The thermae thus became part of the triad that pacified the urban plebs, a remedy for social unrest disguised as imperial hospitality. The architecture of the baths also facilitated discreet monitoring. There were hidden service corridors, internal passages used by slaves and inspectors, resting chambers where authorities could meet away from the public. In some cases, there are reports of informers roaming the baths in search of cursed phrases against the emperor, veiled criticisms of the Senate, or whispers of conspiracies. The informal atmosphere caused citizens to lower their guard and that was precisely what the state wanted. The steam of the baths did not only conceal bodies, it concealed the presence of watchful eyes, trained ears, and sharp memories. But control went beyond politics and extended to sexual morality and customs. Despite the general nudity, there were strict norms on physical contact, obscene gestures and behaviors deemed immoral. The presence of prostitutes, though common, was regulated, and in certain periods, edicts expressly forbade certain types of touch, speech, or display. Roman morality, marked by tensions between Republican conservatism and Hellenistic hedonism, projected itself in the baths as a silent battlefield. The body was free, but only to a point. Beauty was celebrated, but within invisible frames. The arrival of Upbam, Christianity, starting in the 3rd century after Christ, intensified these tensions. Christian leaders denounced the baths as dens of vanity, paganism, and sin. The idea of collective nudity, once seen as natural or even virtuous, came to be associated with moral disorder. Early priests warned against the dangers of idle talk, promiscuity, and the cult of the body, and some converts voluntarily distanced themselves from the bathhouses. Yet even Christians, over the centuries, could not completely erase the Roman bath legacy. They adapted it, moralized it, and partially perpetuated it in monasteries and charitable institutions. The baths were therefore paradoxical environments, spaces of freedom and control, of pleasure and discipline, of communion and espionage. They taught the citizen how to behave, how to relate, how to appear, and how to obey, even without realizing it. More than washing bodies, the warm waters of the thermae also washed away social conflicts, political tensions, and traces of dissent. Not through explicit censorship, but through continuous immersion in a culture of comfort that seduced, shaped, and anesthetized. And so, amid the perfumed steam, Rome crafted its own pedagogy of the body and of order. The baths, with their serene beauty and enveloping heat, taught the citizen how to be Roman: strong, clean, restrained, watchful, and loyal. For centuries, the Roman baths gleamed as the liquid mirror of imperial greatness. Their towering columns, vaulted ceilings adorned with mosaics, and the constant murmur of flowing water symbolized more than comfort. They embodied the idea of a civilized, orderly, and eternal empire. But like everything in Rome, even its waters knew the time of ebb. And this decline was not sudden, but rather the result of a long historical process, where religion, economy, politics, and culture intertwined like the hidden veins of an underground river that slowly dries up. The baths, once a symbol of abundance and harmony, gradually became living ruins of a past that seeped through the cracks of history. Christianity, which had been growing quietly since the 1st century after Christ, began to gain strength in the urban fabric of Rome. Its early communities viewed public spaces of nudity, ostentation, and paganism with suspicion. For early Christians, the body was no longer merely an expression of health and civic virtue. It was the temple of the spirit, and therefore required modesty, silence, and restraint. The baths, with their sculptures of nude gods, erotic paintings, and the exposure of mingled bodies, came to be seen as symbols of the moral decay of paganism. As the Christian faith became dominant, the baths lost their social prestige and ideological support. The decisive turning point came with the Edict of Milan in 313 after Christ, when Christianity was officially legalized by Constantine. Although the baths were still in use, the new spiritual climate of the city began to shift the center of public life toward basilicas, baptisteries, and monasteries. Bathing began to be associated with vanity, flesh, and worldly luxury. Ecclesiastical leaders denounced the bathhouses as places of temptation and sin, calling the people to inner purification, not with hot water and perfumed oils, but with fasting, prayer, and tears of repentance. Nudity, once natural, was now covered by a new morality. The body, once celebrated, was disciplined by doctrine, but it was not only faith that drained the baths. Beginning in the 3rd century, the empire plunged into a deep economic and military crisis. Barbarian invasions on the borders, rampant inflation, currency devaluation, political fractures, and internal strife made the administration of cities increasingly difficult. The aqueducts, vital structures for the operation of the baths, were damaged, looted, or neglected. With less water available, supplying the grand bathhouses became unfeasible. The maintenance of these mega-structures required resources, skilled technicians, labor, and stability, all of which were in short supply in a Rome on the brink of collapse. In the 5th century, with the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 after Christ, the urban trauma was profound. Many public buildings were damaged or abandoned. The baths, already in decline, definitively lost their central role. The invaders, who did not share the Roman habits of daily bathing, had little interest in restoring these structures. Over the following centuries, they were gradually occupied, dismantled, or converted. Marble was removed to build churches. Columns were reused in medieval palaces. Broken statues were buried, and the once steaming halls became storage rooms, stables, or ruins. And yet, even in their decline, the baths continued to inhabit the collective imagination. Some monasteries maintained small bath chambers, reinterpreted under Christian values. In certain regions, the practice of communal bathing survived in adapted versions, with separate times for each gender, stricter rules, and medical purposes. In popular memory, the baths were slowly cloaked in the veil of myth, places from another time, where Rome was full, clean, and eternal. What was once daily culture became evocative ruin. What was once the noise of bodies and water turned into the silence of stone and moss. Modern archaeology, by excavating the depths of these constructions, has uncovered the remnants of a civilization that mastered water as language and made it a code of belonging. The fragments of mosaics, hidden pipework, and remnants of furnaces and boilers still tell a story that time could not erase. Because the baths were more than buildings, they were physical expressions of a worldview, where the clean body reflected the order of the cosmos, and public coexistence was both a privilege and a duty. Today, when visiting the Baths of Caracalla or of Diocletian, when touching the marble worn smooth by time, the modern traveler hears an ancient whisper. Here, Rome bathed not only its citizens, but its very ideal of humanity. And when the water ceased to flow, it was not merely a hydraulic system that failed. It was the city that found itself dehydrated from within, and in losing its baths, it lost a part of the empire itself. Although the aqueducts dried up and the marble halls were silenced by time, the Roman baths never fully disappeared. They remained alive in the memory of Western civilization, like an invisible architecture that persists under new forms, new names, new cultures. For bathing in Rome was never merely a hygienic practice. It was a ritual of identity, a civic gesture, a celebration of the body and of community. And this heritage, even diluted and transformed, continued to flow through the veins of history, like an underground spring that resurfaces when least expected. From the Renaissance onward, as Europe began to rediscover ancient texts and excavate the remnants of the past, the baths returned to the light. Archaeologists, architects, and artists began to study with fascination the remains of the two baths of Caracalla, Diocletian, Trajan, and Agrippa, mapping their hydraulic systems, deciphering inscriptions, and mentally reconstructing their spaces. Many of these ruins, covered in moss and silence, became essential destinations for intellectuals and travelers on the so-called European Grand Tour. Painters such as Hubert Robert and Piranesi portrayed their collapsed vaults with poetry and reverence. Poets described them as pagan cathedrals of the flesh, where the past still breathed. But the legacy of the baths did not remain solely in art. It translated into urban and architectural innovations throughout Europe and beyond. The public baths of the Islamic world, the hammams, though rooted in their own traditions, absorbed many Roman principles of thermal flow, staged purification, and communal use. In the medicinal spas of the 17th and 18th centuries, especially in cities like Bath in England, Baden-Baden in Germany, and Vichy in France, the concepts of relaxation, sociability, and physical well-being strongly echoed the Roman thermal tradition. Even in modern health centers, sports clubs, and contemporary spa resorts, there is something of Rome in every heated pool, every steam room, every space of immersion and bodily contemplation. Language, too, preserves its traces. Words like thermal baths, bathhouse, spa, derived from the Latin expression sanitas per aquam, health through water, are echoes of that past. The values associated with bathing, rest, purification, encounter, aesthetics, continue to shape modern wellness culture. The global wellness industry, which moves billions worldwide, still walks on foundations laid in the heart of the empire. And more than that, it continues to promote, even unconsciously, the ancient Roman idea that caring for the body is caring for the city, and that there is virtue in coexistence. Cinema, literature, and even video games have rediscovered the baths as symbols of Rome in its fullness. Epic films set scenes of conspiracy or seduction in these marble and steam-filled halls. Historical novels describe decisive encounters at the edges of the pools. Documentaries showcase digital reconstructions of these lost marvels. Even those who have never set foot in the ruins feel as if they know that place because it is etched into our imagination as the setting of an idealized world where beauty and power met beneath the same roof. But the most surprising realization is that the legacy of the baths lives not only in the stones that remain, or in the arts that celebrated them. It lives above all in an idea of society, that public space can be beautiful, free, sensory, accessible, and dignified. In times when individualism advances and community bonds grow thin, looking back at the Roman baths is to rediscover the strength of being together, stripped of conventions, united by heat, equalized by water. The baths remind us that the ideal city is not made only of walls and markets, but of encounters, sharing, and collective sensory experiences. Today, walking through the ruins of the great baths, one still feels the echo of footsteps, the scent of heated stone, the reflection of columns in water that no longer flows. Above all, one feels the silence of absence, a silence that speaks. It says that Rome, though fallen, remains standing in our most ordinary gestures, and that in the waters of a hot bath, in the murmur of a sauna, in the tranquility of a spa, there is something ancestral that connects us to the Romans, the belief that the body deserves to be celebrated, that time must be honored, and that a city is only complete when it welcomes not just the people, but also their skin, their fatigue, their longing for rest and beauty.